We're moving into section 3 today, and this section is going to focus on part 2 of the speaking test. You'll know this as the talk, but this is also called the long turn. And we're going to move back to the idea of fluency and coherence in band descriptor terms. And specifically, we're looking at the idea of dividing and organizing your part 2 talk, as well as planning your talk using the strategy of segmenting. Now, what is this? What is segmenting? Well, segmenting is the act of breaking something large up into smaller, more manageable parts. Consider an orange for a moment. Do you think you could fit an entire orange in your mouth? Well, if you could, that would be pretty talk in part 2. It can be hard for the examiner to digest and understand what we're saying if we don't break up our talk into smaller, more manageable parts. But if we do break up our talk, if we segment, we appear much. Let's look at a topic card to begin with. It's for the task of describe a child that you know. You may want to read this through just for a moment and consider how you might respond to this topic card. Of the talk will come first, as they're too small to form their own supported segments. So they're just going to all appear at the beginning. It doesn't matter that how old the child is comes after how often you see them. So the talk does not need to run in the order of the card. So the introduction to your talk may look something like this. I'm going to talk about my niece. Bulk of your talk. This is a case of writing down 3 points for each of the remaining prompts or bullet points on the topic card. If possible, follow the idea, support, example strategy, ISE or ICE, if you want to keep that in your mind, to give you a clear sense of progression. Now let's have a look at what her last Sunday. Let's keep going. What she's like. That's the next prompt. Idea, intelligent, naughty. Support, she takes after her mum. That means that she's like her mum. We talk about takes after when we think about children and their parents. And example, she helped her brother with his maths homework, but she didn't do her own. And finally, how do you feel about this child? Well, I feel protective. That's the idea. Why do I feel protective? That's the support. I feel protective because she can be quite clumsy. For example, I took her to the park and I had to watch her like a hawk. That's an idiom that we use. Now notice that I'm not using perfect grammar here. You'll notice the missing article before the word hawk, for example. That doesn't matter. When you're planning, forget about the grammar, forget about the spelling. It's all about the speed and the content that you put down on the page. Now, moving to the final step, step 3. And this is all about how we introduce different segments of the response. Now, with the first part of the talk, this should always begin the same way. I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about my dog, I'm going to talk about my holiday, I'm going to talk about my job, I'm going to talk about my niece, I'm going to talk about my favorite hobby, whatever it is. This will make sure you have an accurate start and that you're not stumbling from the very beginning. But after you've done this, you have options for introducing the other segments. You can either go direct, you go straight into your answer. So how often you see him or her? I see her about once a week. Or you can create this more indirect introduction to the answer of that part of the topic card. With regards to how often I'd see her, I'd say it's about once a week. As for what the child is like, she's a very intelligent child, but quite naughty, very direct. Or the introduction response, as for what she's like, I'd describe her as intelligent but quite naughty. Notice how all the introduction responses use the I'd form. So with regards to I'd, as for I'd, if I think about I'd say, I'd describe, etc. So make sure you use those as well. Now, when you're planning, make sure you write a D or an I next to each of your columns with their 3 points. And then this way, you won't stumble over your words worrying about how you're going to begin your segment. Let's have a look at what this looks like in practice, looking at my plan for this talk on this topic card. Now, black and white information. Idea, intelligent, naughty, support, takes after mum, example, brother's math homework. Finally, how I feel about her, idea, protective, support, can be clumsy, example, park, use the hawk idiom. Again, notice the note forms that I'm using. To do in 1 minute, but it can be done with practice. If you want to save a bit of time, you can try replacing the titles of the columns with letters. So WSL for what she's like, HO for how often, and so forth. Okay, so how can we bring this all together into a model answer? Now, a reminder of the topic. You can time me here. Let's get started. I'm going to talk about my niece. Her name is Leah. She's 7 years old and she's my older sister's second child. I see her about once a week. She goes to school during the week, but all our family usually get together on Sundays for a family meal. But a bit naughty. I think she takes after her mum in that way, who was just like that when we were kids. For instance, just the other day, Leah was helping her older brother with his maths homework, but when it came to I tend to feel quite protective over her. which is probably because she's quite prone to being quite clumsy. She's already had quite a few accidents in her time, so it's important to keep a close eye on her. I took her to the park a few weeks ago, for example, and I had to watch her like a hawk while she was on the swings just to make sure she didn't fall off. Still, she's a really fun child to be around, and she my talk very, very clear. I want to make all my pronunciation very clear. We talked about that in the previous section, the importance of not going too quickly. Anyway, hopefully that gave you a good idea of how you can plan your Part 2 talk and how you can deliver your Part 2 talk using the strategy of segmenting.